Good evening, friends. Today, we're going to talk about something tender, a bit raw, and certainly real: why men return after no contact. Now, I want to begin by saying this isn't about assigning blame, labeling genders, or fitting people into tiny emotional boxes. This is about understanding. About putting language to experiences that so many people feel but struggle to name. Let's begin here. Many of us confuse silence with detachment. We assume that if someone pulls away, they've stopped caring. But in reality, a man withdrawing often signals overwhelm, not indifference. You see, disconnection doesn't mean someone isn't thinking about you. It might mean they're thinking so much they don't know how to act. In many social and emotional narratives, especially for men, there is little room to say, "I don't know what I'm feeling." So instead, they retreat. They go silent. And for a while, they're gone. But gone doesn't mean gone for vulnerability. That shaky, beautiful state of being open-hearted doesn't come easy for many people. And culturally, men are often taught that vulnerability is weakness, not strength. So when emotional stakes get high, when a relationship feels too intimate, too exposed, their instinct may be to pull back. But here's the thing: the power of vulnerability doesn't vanish. It waits. It lingers in the background. And often, after the silence, men return not because they didn't care but because the emotional armor finally cracked. And underneath was longing. And regret. And clarity. That's not a game. That's human. We've been sold this narrative that men are emotionally simple. That they're either in or out, black or white, present or gone. And I'm here to call that what it is: a myth. In my research on shame and vulnerability, one thing became clear: everyone has complex emotional landscapes. Men too. But many aren't taught how to navigate those internal worlds. So when they go quiet, it's often a kind of internal processing done awkwardly, privately, and slowly. And when they return, it's frequently after some combination of reflection, regret, and growth. That doesn't mean the return is perfect. It means it's human. And finally, let's talk about the silence. No contact isn't just about ignoring someone. It's about choosing peace over confusion. It's about drawing a boundary. And here's the truth. Boundaries teach people how to treat us. When a woman initiates no contact, she's often saying, "I deserve clarity, presence, and care. Not uncertainty." And that boundary? That silence? It's not punishment, it's a mirror. For many men, that mirror shows them not just who they've been but who they could be. And sometimes, that's what calls them back. Not just the loss of a partner, but the realization of the kind of man they want to become. So, why do men return after no contact? Not always because they miss what was, but because silence gave them space to reckon with what they could be. Let's remember, growth doesn't always happen in the moment. Sometimes it happens in the pause. When we talk about emotional disconnection, especially in the context of romantic relationships and no-contact periods, it's easy to misinterpret silence as absence, not just physical absence, but emotional absence too. We tend to assume that if someone steps away, becomes distant, or cuts off communication, it must mean they no longer care. That they've emotionally detached. That their feelings have dried up, vanished, disappeared. But this assumption isn't just overly simplistic, it's also deeply misleading, especially when we're talking about men. Emotional disconnection and emotional absence are not the same thing. And confusing the two can cause us unnecessary pain and misunderstanding. Let's unpack what emotional disconnection actually looks like, and why, particularly for men, it might not be a sign of absence, but of overwhelm, internal conflict, or even deep emotional processing. From the time they are young, many men are taught, explicitly or subtly, that certain emotional expressions are not safe. They're often praised for being stoic, for toughing it out, for being strong, and strength, in many traditional definitions, means not showing vulnerability. So when emotional stakes rise, when love gets real, when someone gets close enough to see the unpolished parts of them, the safest option they've learned is to pull away. To disconnect. To shut down. It's not always conscious. It's not a strategy. It's a learned behavior. It's survival. And it's important that we see this for what it is: not a reflection of your worth, not a sign that you didn't matter, but rather a reflection of how little space many men have been given to feel, express, and stay emotionally present in intimate spaces. When a man disconnects, what we're often seeing is not a lack of emotion, but an emotional overload that he doesn't know how to regulate. There are feelings happening, powerful ones, even, but they're not being expressed in a visible, articulate, relational way. Instead of reaching out, he retreats. Instead of naming what's going on, he goes silent. It may look like he's emotionally absent, but more often, he's emotionally tangled up inside a storm with no compass, no map, and very few tools. Now, this isn't to excuse harm or avoidance. Disconnection can hurt. It can leave people confused, anxious, and grieving something that isn't even officially over. But understanding it helps us respond from a place of clarity instead of shame or self-blame. Because too often, women take emotional disconnection personally. They internalize it as a statement of unworthiness. If he left, I must not have been enough. When in reality, his departure often has more to do with his own emotional bandwidth or lack thereof than anything you did or didn't do. Here's the paradox: emotional disconnection is often a sign that someone cares deeply but hasn't built the emotional capacity to stay present in the discomfort of intimacy. To care for someone, to really care, means sitting in uncertainty, in fear of loss, in vulnerability. And if someone hasn't learned how to hold those emotions without fleeing, they may run from what they most desire. Not because they want to lose it, but because they don't know how to have it. This is where the internal conflict comes in. A man might disconnect, thinking it will relieve the pressure, make things simpler, or give him space. But what often happens is the opposite: the silence becomes heavier. The feelings don't go away, they amplify. And with time, he may begin to recognize what he felt only in fragments before: love, regret, sadness, longing. This is part of the reason why men often return after no contact. It's not that they suddenly developed new feelings, it's that they finally had space to hear them without the noise of fear, pride, or emotional confusion. We all long to feel seen and understood. Emotional connection is one of our most basic human needs. But connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage. The kind of courage that isn't loud or flashy, but quiet and steady. The courage to stay in the room when emotions get uncomfortable. The courage to speak feelings out loud, even when they come out messy. And that kind of courage takes practice, especially for people who have never been given a safe space to feel. When men disconnect, it's often not about you. It's about them. About their fear. Their shame. Their emotional avoidance. About the stories they tell themselves about what it means to be a man, and how those stories shut down the very tenderness they actually long to express. It's about how vulnerable connection feels unsafe, and silence feels like protection even if it costs them love. Emotional disconnection is not emotional absence. It's often a temporary form of emotional self-preservation. It's not a sign that someone doesn't care, but that they're struggling to stay connected to themselves, let alone to someone else. And when we understand that, we can begin to hold space for complexity. We can grieve what we've lost without making it mean we were unworthy. We can choose boundaries not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. And we can see people, especially men, not as heartless or emotionally absent, but as emotionally unequipped, still learning, still trying, still human. The silence of disconnection may be painful, but it's not always the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of emotional reckoning, a messy, beautiful invitation to grow. Vulnerability is one of the most powerful forces in human connection, yet it is often misunderstood, avoided, or delayed, particularly in men. In the context of relationships, romantic or otherwise, vulnerability is the courage to be open, to be seen, to reveal not just the polished version of yourself but the messy, imperfect parts that make you human. But here's the paradox: while vulnerability is a key ingredient for deep and meaningful connection, it is also one of the most difficult things for many people to practice. This is especially true for men, who often find themselves at odds with the cultural narratives about vulnerability, strength, and what it means to be a man. It's not that they deny vulnerability, but rather that they delay it, struggle with it, and sometimes push it down for much longer than they should. The power of vulnerability is not always denied, but often postponed. This delay is not a reflection of a lack of desire to connect, rather, it's about the fear, uncertainty, and internalized messages that make vulnerability feel unsafe. For many men, vulnerability is seen as a sign of weakness, something to be avoided or minimized. They're taught, from an early age, that real men don't show emotions. They don't express fear, sadness, or uncertainty. They are taught to suck it up, to keep going, to push through, to handle things on their own. As a result, many men suppress their emotions, internalize their struggles, and build emotional walls to protect themselves from the perceived dangers of being vulnerable. But here's the truth: vulnerability is not weakness. It's strength. It's the raw, unfiltered truth of who we are. And while men might not openly deny vulnerability, they often delay it for fear of the consequences. They hold back, not because they don't care, but because they fear being judged, rejected, or perceived as less than. The truth is, vulnerability takes immense courage. It requires a willingness to show up fully, not just with your strengths and successes but also with your doubts, fears, and imperfections. And for many men, that courage doesn't come easily. What we often misunderstand, particularly in romantic relationships, is that when a man pulls away or withdraws emotionally, it's not necessarily because he doesn't feel anything. It's often because he doesn't know how to handle the depth of his emotions. It's because he hasn't been given the tools or space to process vulnerability in a healthy way. Instead, he delays it, sometimes for weeks, months, or even years, until, eventually, the emotional weight becomes too much to carry on his own. And that's when the vulnerability surfaces. The delay of vulnerability is not about emotional absence. It's about emotional processing. It's about needing time and space to figure out how to be honest, open, and vulnerable without feeling exposed, weak, or ashamed. And when that time comes, when a man feels ready to open up and express his feelings, it can be a profound moment of connection. It's a moment that requires not only courage on his part but also patience and understanding from those around him. Vulnerability is not an on-demand behavior. It's something that emerges when a person feels safe, supported, and ready to face the rawness of their own emotions. This delay in vulnerability is often misunderstood by partners, especially when it's accompanied by withdrawal or silence. It's easy to take this behavior personally, to assume that if someone isn't sharing, they don't care, or that they're hiding something. But the reality is much more complicated. When a man withdraws or disconnects, it's often because he's grappling with emotions that he doesn't know how to articulate or express. It's not a rejection, it's a process of internal conflict. And when he finally reaches the point where he feels able to share, it's because he has worked through those emotions, or at least begun to. The truth is that vulnerability doesn't always come in an instant. It's a gradual unfolding, a slow peeling back of layers. It takes time, reflection, and emotional maturity to reach a place where vulnerability feels like a safe and powerful choice. And even then, vulnerability can feel like an act of bravery, one that requires the willingness to be hurt, misunderstood, or even rejected. But this is where the magic happens. Vulnerability is the gateway to connection. It's the bridge that allows people to truly see each other, to understand each other at the deepest level. And when that kind of connection is made, it can transform relationships in ways that nothing else can. So, when men return after a period of silence or emotional distance, it's not because they've been emotionally absent. It's because they've been processing. They've been wrestling with their own vulnerabilities, and they've finally reached a place where they feel ready to share them. This moment of return is often a sign of growth. It's a sign that they've begun to understand themselves better, that they've confronted their own fears and insecurities, and that they're now ready to show up more authentically. The key to understanding the power of vulnerability is recognizing that it's not something that can be rushed or forced. It's a process, not a performance. It's not something that can be demanded, but something that emerges when the conditions are right. And for many men, those conditions take time to build. They need time to feel safe, to feel supported, and to feel that it's okay to show their true selves without fear of judgment or rejection. Vulnerability, at its core, is about being human. It's about embracing our imperfections and our strengths, our fears and our desires. It's about showing up in relationships not as an idealized version of ourselves, but as our real, authentic selves, messy, complicated, and beautiful. And while many men may delay their vulnerability, it doesn't mean they don't feel it. It simply means that vulnerability is a journey, and it takes time to reach a place where they're ready to take that step. So, when they do, it's not something to take for granted. It's something to honor and appreciate because it takes real courage to show up and be vulnerable. There's a pervasive myth in society, one that suggests men are emotionally simple. That they operate on a more straightforward emotional plane, with clear, easily defined feelings, and that when they say something, they mean exactly what they say. It's a myth that we're all familiar with, whether consciously or not. It's the assumption that men are less affected by the complexities of emotions than women, that they don't experience the same levels of vulnerability, shame, regret, or confusion. But the reality is much different. The truth is that men's emotions are just as rich, complicated, and layered as anyone else's. And while they may express these emotions differently, often through silence, withdrawal, or detachment, it doesn't mean they are free from regret or emotional conflict. It simply means they've learned different ways of coping, often rooted in cultural narratives about what it means to be a man. Regret is one of the most powerful and complex emotions that people can experience. It's the feeling of wishing you'd done something differently, of wanting to rewrite the past and undo mistakes. It's painful, raw, and can weigh heavily on the heart and mind. And for many men, regret is something they wrestle with in silence. It's not something they easily talk about, not something they share openly. They often hold it inside, trying to make sense of it alone, without a safe space to process those feelings. This internal struggle is what makes emotional reflection so challenging, particularly when it comes to relationships. Men who experience regret may not always show it outwardly, but it can be all-consuming internally. Regret isn't just about wishing for a different outcome, it's about confronting the reality of their actions and the impact they've had on others. It's about realizing that their words, their choices, their behaviors, have hurt someone they care about. And that realization can be devastating. It's not easy to sit with regret, to face the parts of yourself that you wish you could change, to reckon with the mistakes you've made. And yet, regret is often a necessary part of growth. It's a sign that someone has learned something from their experience, that they recognize their own imperfections, that they acknowledge their role in the pain they caused. But even though regret can be a catalyst for self-awareness, it's also something that many men try to avoid or suppress. They fear that expressing regret will make them appear weak, that it will expose them to judgment or rejection. So instead, they push it down, hoping it will disappear. But regret doesn't disappear. It stays, quietly festering, often leading to emotional distance and detachment. Reflection, then, becomes a vital process in the journey of emotional healing. Reflection is the act of looking back at a situation, not with the desire to blame or shame, but with the intention of understanding and learning. It's about asking difficult questions: what happened? Why did it happen? What was my role in it? And perhaps most importantly, how can I do better next time? This process of reflection is not always linear, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's something that takes time, space, and a willingness to be vulnerable enough to face uncomfortable truths. For many men, this kind of reflection can feel like an internal battle, especially if they've been conditioned to suppress their feelings or to avoid emotional discomfort at all costs. The myth of emotional simplicity suggests that men's emotions are more easily understood, less complicated, and easier to manage. But the truth is that emotions are never simple. They are always complex and multi-layered. And when men face difficult emotions like regret, they often have to work through layers of fear, shame, and confusion before they can get to the root of what they're feeling. They may ask themselves questions like, do I really feel regret? Or am I just ashamed of what I did? Is it regret I'm feeling, or guilt? These questions can be difficult to untangle, and the answers may not be clear right away. But the process of working through these emotions is what leads to deeper emotional awareness and growth. Unfortunately, in a culture that often teaches men to bottle up their feelings, to avoid showing vulnerability, and to push through hardship without acknowledging their emotional states, the opportunity for reflection can be rare. And without this space for reflection, men may act impulsively, making decisions that they later regret without fully understanding why they did it in the first place. This lack of emotional reflection can also prevent men from fully understanding the emotional dynamics at play in their relationships. It can lead to misunderstandings, emotional misfires, and, in some cases, disconnection from the people they care about. But when men do allow themselves the space to reflect, to examine their own actions, and to sit with the discomfort of regret, it can lead to a profound shift. Reflection allows for growth. It allows for change. And it allows men to see themselves and others in a more compassionate light. It enables them to understand that they're not defined by their mistakes, but by how they learn from them and grow. One of the most important aspects of reflection is the realization that mistakes are not the end of the story. Regret is not the final chapter. It's simply part of the narrative, a chapter that allows for learning, for course correction, and for emotional growth. When men experience regret and reflect on it, they begin to break free from the myth of emotional simplicity. They realize that their emotions are not linear, that they are not one-dimensional, and that it's okay to be confused, to be conflicted, to be uncertain. They understand that they don't have to have all the answers right away, and that growth is often a messy, non-linear process. It's crucial to recognize that emotional complexity is not a weakness. It's a strength. The ability to reflect on one's actions, to feel regret, and to learn from those experiences is one of the most powerful tools for emotional growth. But it requires vulnerability, the willingness to sit with uncomfortable emotions, to acknowledge them, and to take responsibility for the impact they've had on others. And for many men, that vulnerability takes time to cultivate. But when they finally do embrace it, when they allow themselves to reflect honestly on their mistakes and their regrets, it's a transformative process. It's a process that leads to deeper emotional awareness, stronger relationships, and a more profound sense of self-understanding. Ultimately, the myth of emotional simplicity is just that, a myth. Men are not immune to emotional complexity. They experience regret, reflection, and all the other layers of human emotion just as deeply as anyone else. And when they begin to embrace this complexity, to reflect on their actions, and to take responsibility for their growth, they open the door to greater connection, not just with others, but with themselves. This is where true emotional maturity lies, in the willingness to face your own mistakes, learn from them, and emerge on the other side stronger and more self-aware. When someone goes silent, when they initiate a period of no contact, it's often assumed that this silence is a reflection of emotional absence, that they've shut down entirely, that they no longer care. But this assumption couldn't be further from the truth. Silence, especially in the context of relationships, can serve as a powerful trigger for internal reckoning. For many people, especially men, periods of no contact can prompt an emotional awakening, a moment of reflection, introspection, and reckoning with their own emotions and actions. No contact doesn't always mean emotional disengagement, rather, it often marks the beginning of an internal battle. In relationships, silence can be both a defense mechanism and a call for self-reflection. It's easy to think of no contact as an abandonment or rejection, but in reality, it can be a temporary emotional withdrawal designed to process complicated emotions. For many, this silence offers a space to step back, reflect, and ultimately face the internal challenges they've been avoiding, the unresolved fears, the unresolved guilt, and the emotions they've repressed. For men, in particular, the idea of stepping away from a relationship or disengaging emotionally isn't always an indicator of disinterest. It's often a sign that they are overwhelmed. They may not know how to deal with the emotional intensity of the situation. They may fear that if they speak, if they remain engaged, they will only say the wrong thing, make the situation worse, or expose themselves in ways they aren't ready for. This retreat into silence can be the beginning of an emotional reckoning, the start of a journey where they begin to sift through their feelings, their behaviors, and their own sense of self-worth. When the noise of a relationship is turned down, when communication stops and the external pressures fade, the inner world becomes impossible to ignore. No contact doesn't erase the emotional weight of the situation, rather, it amplifies it. When there is no immediate outlet for expression, when there are no distractions or external validations, everything that has been suppressed or buried begins to rise to the surface. Feelings of regret, confusion, and guilt can surface in ways that feel overwhelming. But this is also the moment where deep internal change can happen, when someone is finally able to confront their own emotions in a raw, unfiltered way. The silence forces a confrontation with the self. When a man is left alone with his thoughts, without the ability to act on impulse or respond to external cues, he is faced with his own fears and insecurities. This internal reckoning is uncomfortable. It brings up painful realizations. And it requires him to reckon not only with the emotions tied to the relationship itself but also with the emotions he carries about his own identity, past mistakes, and fears of failure. The absence of external validation forces him to seek clarity within himself. Without the external noise of the relationship, he is left to hear the inner dialogue he has long ignored or suppressed. And this can be the beginning of true emotional growth. It is in the silence that many men are forced to confront their deeper fears: the fear of being unworthy, the fear of being seen as vulnerable, the fear of being judged. Men, in particular, are often conditioned to suppress these fears and emotions. They are taught to prioritize logic over feeling, to be stoic, to keep their emotions in check. But when a relationship hits a crossroads and communication ceases, these suppressed feelings don't go away. They build up, and the silence gives them space to emerge. This period of no contact, then, becomes a crucible for personal growth. The emotions that once stayed hidden beneath the surface are forced into the light, demanding acknowledgement, processing, and resolution. For many men, this time apart can lead to a painful but necessary process of self-examination. The reckoning that comes from no contact isn't just about the relationship at hand, it's about their deeper emotional patterns. It's about how they've historically reacted to conflict, how they've dealt with vulnerability, and how they've related to others emotionally. The silence can bring clarity. It forces a man to question his actions, his decisions, and the emotional distance he has created, both in the current situation and in past relationships. It allows him to reflect on whether he's been running from his feelings or whether he's been trying to protect himself from emotional pain by avoiding deeper emotional engagement. No contact, in this context, becomes a space for personal growth, but that growth can feel painful and disorienting. It's not easy to face the truth of your own emotional shortcomings, especially when you've built an identity around being in control or strong. But the internal reckoning triggered by no contact often marks the beginning of emotional maturity. It's in these moments of reflection that people, men included, begin to understand their patterns and develop the emotional intelligence to handle relationships in a healthier, more authentic way. In relationships, emotional closeness requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, as we know, is not always comfortable. It's the ability to show up and be seen, to allow someone else to witness your true self, with all of your flaws, your weaknesses, and your insecurities. For many men, this is a terrifying prospect. Vulnerability feels like an emotional risk, and the fear of being judged or rejected can be overwhelming. But during a period of no contact, this emotional risk is not something that can be avoided. Silence forces the confrontation with emotional truth. It asks the difficult questions: why did I pull away? Why did I avoid facing the real emotions that were bubbling up? What am I really afraid of? These questions don't have immediate answers, but they push someone towards self-awareness. The period of no contact acts as a kind of emotional detox, a break from the usual emotional patterns that prevent growth. It forces a man to slow down and consider what he truly wants from a relationship, what he needs from himself, and how he can show up differently in the future. And in this process, the internal reckoning that happens during no contact can lead to a clearer sense of self, more honesty, and a deeper emotional understanding. This is not to say that no contact is easy, or that it's a guaranteed path to self-realization. It's often painful, confusing, and fraught with uncertainty. But it's in these painful moments of emotional withdrawal that many people find the courage to confront their own emotional complexity. They are forced to look inward, to question old patterns, and to confront the parts of themselves that have been neglected or buried. The truth is, no contact doesn't have to be the end of a relationship. It can be the beginning of a deeper, more authentic connection with oneself and, eventually, with others. When we give ourselves the space to reckon with our emotions, to process our feelings, and to sit with the discomfort, we are more capable of building connections that are grounded in authenticity, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so grateful for all your support, and I'm glad you're enjoying the content. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. All my friends who are watching, I appreciate you. Thanks for being part of this journey with me.